Hey everyone, welcome to Season 5, Episode 5 of the Choose You Calgary podcast. For our listeners who are tuning in for the first time, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And for our returning listeners, I want to say welcome back. My name is Aiden, and I'm the host for the Choose You Calgary podcast. And on this podcast, we bring on current students, faculty, or staff members and chat about different areas across the University of Calgary, such as clubs, research opportunities, different involvements, and more. And our most important goal is to capture the student experience so that our prospective students can really get a glimpse as to what it's like to study here. And so for today's episode, I'm joined here with Stephen Kelly. Stephen is the Assistant Registrar for Student Recruitment and Applicant Relations here at UCalgary, and he is here to tell us about the admissions process and how our undergraduate applications work. So I'm really looking forward to chatting more about that. And with that being said, welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Aiden.
Of course. So would you be able to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Sure. So as you said, my name is Stephen. I'm Assistant Registrar for Student Recruitment and Applicant Relations here at the University of Calgary. And really what I like to tell students that means is we lead a team of individuals who connect with prospective students about applying to the university. We're the cheerleaders. We can't get students in, but certainly answer all their questions along the way.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So we're just going to kind of hop right into some of these questions here. So to start off, how many different programs does the University of Calgary offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's about 250 different programs in terms of the different combinations. There's 14 faculties at the University of Calgary, 8 of which are available for high school applicants to apply to as direct entry. But the beauty of many of the University of Calgary's degrees is that they're highly customizable. So you can add minors, double degrees, majors, combined degrees, all kinds of different pieces to enhance your program. So all in about 250, but that can really vary depending on how a student chooses.
Nice. So I'm sure students can hopefully find something within those 250 programs that they're interested in. Great. So what are some of the most common programs that you usually would see an interest in, if there is any, or maybe it's more kind of evenly spread out?
Sure. I think it's pretty evenly spread out. There's interest across all of our majors. I think sometimes, students are keenly interested in which degree will have the highest chance of employment. And, a big part for that for me is telling students 94% of all of our programs, our graduates had employment afterwards. So there's options for everyone. But sometimes when you look at the different degree options, you'll see majors that I think gravitate towards obvious professions. So things like nursing, engineering, so on and so forth. But we have some really underrated programs. I think our astronomy program is pretty amazing, and although smaller, packs a big punch. And there's the dance program, one of the most unique programs in Canada. Community rehabilitation is another pretty unique one, but certainly see our fair share of engineering, business, computer science applications as well.
Nice. So how many undergraduate applications do we usually get per year then?
So every year is a little bit different. And in our role as recruiters, we're trying to get as many applications as possible. But last year, we had about just under 24,000 undergraduate applications for admission. About 16,600 of those were high school applicants. Now, just to frame that a little bit, we welcome 6,400 new incoming students every year. So the way that math works out, about 69% of the students that apply received an offer of admission last year. And as I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later on, 67% of those students received an offer of their first choice.
Okay, that's quite a bit of students. That's awesome, though.
It is a competitive process for sure.
Yeah, for sure. How does the application process differ from students who are applying from Alberta versus an out-of-province student? And how would all of that differ from our international students who are applying?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I want to approach that from sort of two separate lenses. The first part is we have lots of questions about, do we hold quotas? So do we reserve spots for Alberta applicants, for Calgary applicants, for Canadian, Indigenous, international applicants? And the answer is no. We take the most competitive applications regardless of where you come from. We certainly have a finite seats for every one of our programs, and admission is competitive. But in terms of the number of spots, that's really the most competitive applicant will receive the spot. Now, when we talk about the application process itself, we really draw two distinctions. So Alberta applicants, they'll apply through Apply Alberta, which is a common application site for all post-secondary institutions in the province. And students from outside of Alberta, and this is really based off of your educational history, not where you're living. Anyone that has educational credentials outside of Alberta, they'll apply directly through us on the How to Apply page on the university website.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the process, like I said, really is, they're pretty similar. The only difference in Apply Alberta is that you register yourself with Apply Alberta and load in your Alberta student number. Once you finish the Apply Alberta application, it redirects you back to our application to finish the same questions that an out-of-province student would have.
Okay, so it seems like it's pretty straightforward. It'll walk you through it. Nothing to be too afraid of.
I describe to students, it's like making perhaps a more complicated Google account. So it's a series of biographical questions. What's your name? Where are you from? Where did you study? You want to make sure you answer all those questions carefully and accurately, but really easy. There's no essays in the application. There's nothing that you need to immediately prepare. Just answer questions that you probably know the answer to.
Perfect. Sounds great. So when students apply, I'm aware that there's an application fee. How and when would students pay this application fee by? Is there a certain deadline?
Sure. So the application, we charge $125 for students with Canadian credentials, and applicants with international credentials, the application fee is $145. We don't begin to process the application until the application fee is paid. Most students will pay it at the end of submitting their online application, although you can pay afterwards should you wish. The deadline to do so is the same as applying, and so that's March the 1st of every year. And but we encourage you to get the application fee in and get your application in as early as possible.
Great. So speaking of deadlines, are there any other important deadlines that students should be aware of?
Yeah, I think a big one, not necessarily for admission, so to speak, but certainly for scholarships. The big deadline for the Prestige scholarships is December 1st. And to be considered for scholarships, you have to first apply for admission. So I recommend to all students to apply as early as possible and get that application in by December 1st. Now, depending on where you're from, if you're from Alberta, the transcripts, because there's lots of deadlines for documents and those sorts of pieces. If you're from Alberta, we get the transcripts automatically, and there's nothing you need to do as long as you've listed all of your Alberta institutes on your Apply Alberta application, we get the transcripts automatically. For out-of-province students, we really encourage you to upload an initial copy of your transcripts as soon as possible. The technical deadline is March 15th, but again, much like the application fee, the sooner we receive all of your required documents, the sooner we can get you potentially an offer of admission. And every student will have a to-do list on their student center. So after you submit the online application, you'll receive a login for your my.ucalgary.ca webpage, and it has a to-do list of all the items that we need to receive from you. So some students may have some additional documents, maybe English language proficiency. For our self-identified Indigenous applicants who are considered under Indigenous pathway options, there are some documents or required deadlines to submit your proof of Indigenous ancestry, so on and so forth.
So it'll just let them know that we have something that we need from them and they can just upload it directly from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think a big one though for Alberta students is really to emphasize you will see the Alberta transcript on the to-do list, and that's just saying we're going to download this for you. So Alberta applicants with educational history in Alberta, you really don't have to worry about anything on the document side. So.
Perfect. So when students apply, how many choices do they get? How many program choices do they get on their application? And maybe you can go into a bit about how that works.
Sure, yeah. So when students apply, you are eligible to apply for 2 programs as part of your initial application, a first and a second choice. We get students all the time that say, can I submit an extra application and get 2 more choices? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So it's 2 main choices. Now, the first choice, this is really the program, your primary focus to study, the one that you're really hoping for. If a student receives an offer of admission to this program, that's the only offer that they will receive. And we recommend that you rank the program choices with your most desired program as your first choice. Now, the second choice is an opportunity to, when you look at the admission averages or the estimated admission averages online or in our view books, to align a second choice that's a program that you're interested in, but align that with your academic average. And yeah, that's sort of how the second choice will work as a good second option should you not get into your first choice. Now, I think a big part of that is we do multiple rounds of admission throughout the year. And so some students maybe get an offer of admission to their second choice first. We'll still consider them for their first choice later on. And all that's natural and part of the process. And don't worry, if you only get an offer to your second choice, you may still be considered for first choice later on.
So if a student accepts their second choice, they still have a chance at getting into their first choice.
Absolutely, absolutely. We know the first choice is your most desired program, and that's what we're hoping that you choose on your application. And so we will continue to try and review you to see if a position becomes available.
We've been ranked amongst the world's top universities, and we've done it by pushing our limits, challenging ourselves to do better, and seeking knowledge, wherever that journey takes us. Submit your application today to the University of Calgary.
So you said that there's multiple rounds of admission. What is the difference between early admission and standard admission?
Sure. I always tell students these are, in my mind, really technical admission phrases that really just describe the courses that are used in the evaluation, not necessarily the time of when you would receive an evaluation. So here at the University of Calgary, we have competitive admission requirements. When we walk through the process, really, when you first apply, we look at the highest level you've achieved on your application. So for most grade 12 high school students, the highest level you've achieved is your grade 11 courses. Those are the ones you've completed. With the exception of year-long or linear curriculum courses, we don't look at in progress or interim grades. We're only looking at completed courses. So that first review, early admission, is really just describing that we look at your 4 core grade 11 courses required for your major. And every program will have unique requirements, and the core courses will match the competencies that you would need to be successful in your degree program. Now, we do that first round of offer in November. If a student has completed a grade 12 course early, maybe you did one in your grade 11 year, we will look at you under what's called standard admission. And so this is looking at 5 courses for admission. If you don't have all of your grade 12 courses complete, most won't, then we use a blend of your grade 11 and 12 results. And so the timelines of the way the process works, we do our first review in November. A small number of students will receive an offer in the first round. We aim to give maybe 10-15% of our total offers out in November. And then once we get closer to February, once first term results are in from the fall semester, then we do our big second review. And that usually happens just after Valentine's Day in February. So to send lots of love in February, and the bulk of students receive their offers then, and we look at their first term grade 12 courses that are completed combined with any grade 11 courses to fill in the gaps. We do a final review, of course, for students if they still haven't received an offer of admission in typically July of every year once all of your grade 12 courses. The caveat there is there still needs to be a position in the program, and for many of our majors, they will fill up before then. So really, to summarize, you want to apply as early as possible. If you don't get in the first round, that's okay. Most don't. You're not blacklisted. Nothing happens to your application. All that we say is, hey, we looked at your application, we can't consider you for admission at this time, but we're going to look again once your first term grades come in. And once the first term grades come in, then we do a second review, and that's where the bulk of students will receive their offer of admission. Now, I also just want to mention really quickly, some of the timelines get altered a little bit. There are a couple programs, such as our health science program, or our visual studies, or music majors. Dance is another good example. These are the small number of programs that have supplemental requirements. So most of our majors admission is really just based off of your grades, but there are a couple programs, like I mentioned, that will have extra requirements. So the health science major has a series of short answer questions that they ask you, almost like little mini essays, that they will ask you, and that's part of their evaluation. Dance, no shocker, we want to see your dance moves. So there's either an in-person or video audition for the dance program, and similar pieces, the visual studies, that's a portfolio. And then the music as well too, there's a performance as long as a music competency exam. So a little bit different with the ones that have supplementary applications. Most students won't receive their offers of admission until January, just because there's a supplemental review process that has to occur. And so we do see some students that have a first choice to a program with a supplemental major that will get an offer to a second choice. That doesn't mean you didn't get into your first choice. It may just mean that the timelines for those majors are a little bit different. But overall, apply early.
Perfect. Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And the earlier, the better. because then you just have another chance at getting in. So thank you for that. When a student is applying, what are some common mistakes that they should avoid that maybe we see often?
Sure. I think there's probably three big ones that I would mention. The application process is really straightforward, but I think the biggest mistake that I see students do is they apply late. And so there's lots of students that'll say, oh, my grade 11 marks maybe weren't as strong as I think my grade 12 marks will be. And as a result, they want to go and wait to submit their application until January and February. There's no advantage from admission perspective in doing that. And in doing so, you limit yourself in the scholarship that you can apply for. And so that's probably the biggest one, which isn't really necessarily an admission mistake, but you want to get your application in as early as possible so that you can be considered for awards. And if you wait, then it's sort of like basketball. You don't score unless you shoot, right? So some more technical pieces that I would say on the application, you really want to make sure that you've answered all questions thoroughly and carefully. When you get to there's a section that asks you outline your high school history. We want students to list their educational history from grade 10, 11, and 12. And a big part of that, particularly with a Canadian applicant, is that we require all students demonstrate English language proficiency, which for Canadian, American, British, and a handful of other curriculums, if you studied in those curriculums for 3 years, your English proficiency requirement is waived. Some students only write their grade 12 year, and then they get a to-do list item saying submit an IELTS or TOEFL or other English proficiency exam. And that's really just because they didn't list the 3 years of high school under grade 12 year. Something we can solve and fix retroactively really easily, but I wanted to mention that. And then the last part, I think, and this is really more specific to Alberta applicants, but in Apply Alberta, there is a section where it asks you to self-report your grades. We get lots of questions about this. Apply Alberta is a common application amongst all post-secondaries in the province. Some institutions will base admission off of self-reported grades. As I mentioned at the beginning, all of our decisions are competitive and based on your actual grades. So students ask, what do we write in that section? And the answer is, we really just need one course. It doesn't matter if it's completed, in progress, planning to take. You just need one to progress with our application. But I recommend if you're applying to more than just the University of Calgary in Alberta as an Alberta applicant, connect with some of those other schools to see how they want you to list their self-reported grades. But for us, it's not a factor in our decision. What you write on there doesn't matter.
Sounds great. Thank you. So once a student has completed their application, they submit it, all good to go, how long would it usually take for them to hear back? And how would they hear back, whether they're accepted or they didn't get in? How should they expect to hear from that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we're definitely receiving lots for all the students that submitted their application in early October. So the first round of offers for us, we're aiming for, typically it's in the second or third week of November of every year. Once we set the averages, we want to see a little bit of the initial applicant pool to get a sense of it. And like I mentioned before, we want to try to give a very small number, 10 or 15% of students that the offer of admission there. And then after that, we have the big plan review on just after Valentine's Day. Now, if you apply in between those periods, you're not waiting. Those are just sort of the big set reviews based off of the documents that we would see. If we had an out of province applicant as an example, and they submitted their application in early November, typically, it's 2 or 3 weeks. For an international applicant, it's typically 4 to 6 weeks. Now, the caveat I tell all students is the timelines are based off of when we receive all of the required documents on your to-do list, not when you've applied. And so there's some students that maybe applied in October but didn't send us documents until the early January. And so that 4 to 6 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks, depending on where you're from, those timelines kick in based off of when we receive all the documents on the to-do list. So you want to make sure you review those carefully, but for Alberta applicants, we'll get them automatically, and the turnaround time is pretty quick.
Okay, awesome. That sounds great. And would they just be notified on their My UCalgary Student Center that they've been either accepted or not accepted, or would they be sent an email? How does that work?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I missed that question. The biggest part, you'll see the initial decision as quickly as possible on your student center. So the my.ucalgary.ca. That's the fastest way that you'll see the decision. But for students that receive offers of admission, you'll also get an admission package in the mail. Depending on where you're from, and especially with COVID this year, that can take a little longer than normal. But we send those in the mail, within a couple of days of us making the decision on your student center. At the same time, you get an email if anything happens in your student center. So you want to check that carefully and really make sure that the University of Calgary is not in your junk mail folder. So you want to watch those pieces, but watch your email. You'll get the email that something's happened in your student center, and then you can go and take a peek. Again, if you don't get that offer of admission, especially in the first round, don't worry. We're going to continue to look again. And for most students, like I said, just after Valentine's Day in February, you'll get that offer of admission.
Sounds great. Thanks. All right. So we're coming to a close end here. So to end off, what would be some final tips or last pieces of advice that you would want to give to anyone who's considering applying to the University of Calgary?
I think the big one is it's a really daunting decision. When I was in grade 12, I certainly didn't know what program I was going to apply into. So there's lots of pieces that the recruitment team can help you out with that initial decision. Take a campus tour. I always tell students picking university is like buying a car. What do? When you buy a car, well, you test drive a car, right? And picking a university or a college or a polytechnic is the exact same. So come take a campus tour. We offer virtual campus tours if you're from out of town or not comfortable coming for an in-person campus tour. There's lots of information events. Universities have open houses, so really do as much exploring as you can, and then get that application in as soon as possible. The big part is the application is quick and takes no time at all. And I see lots of students delay just because they're unsure of themselves. Be confident and get that application in. And finally, apply for scholarships. It's staggering to me every year when I receive the numbers about how many students have applied for admission, but how many students didn't apply for scholarships. And I think there's a perception that they may not be competitive for scholarships. Not all scholarships are based off of academic merit. Some are based off of financial need or extracurriculars. I'm sure if you listen to Joel's award podcast, you'll hear him talk about the smoking scholarship. It's $3,000 if you are a non-smoker. There's thousands of these that have requirements that are not just academically based. And even if you feel I don't need a scholarship because I'm being funded by the bank of mom and dad or some other external funding source, if you're thinking about applying to grad school, law school, medical school after your undergraduate degree, they all ask what awards did you win in high school, and those sections can look really weak if we don't apply for scholarships now. So it's free money, $17 million, and you want to get that in, right? Like I said before, it's like basketball. You won't score unless you shoot.
Those are great pieces of advice. Thank you for that. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing all of the super useful information and answering all of our questions on the admissions and application process. I'm sure this episode will be super helpful for our prospective student listeners, and I'm sure that they'll really appreciate everything that you had to say. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
For sure. And on that note, I also want to quickly thank everyone for tuning in today. And if anyone is interested in finding out more information about any of the pieces that we chatted about, I will have everything linked in the episode notes. So be sure to check that out. And if anyone has any questions for me, please just send a DM to the choose.ucalgary Instagram, or you can message the University of Calgary Future Students Facebook page, and I'm more than happy to chat on there with you guys. So one last thanks to Stephen again for being here today, and that is all for now. We will be back soon for our next episode.